The Mexico GP is right around the corner, and it seems like drivers will meet some of the old issues that plagued the pure racing in Austin, the track limit violations. The Mexican GP is known for the long main straight that ends up with a sharp combination of corners, and more often than not, drivers are using this runoff area in a bid to keep their car safe for the remainder of the race. But with the stewards being extremely harsh, and with turn 1 being a perfect place to overtake, how will the drivers reply to this challenge combined with the tyre temperatures? And what are the other problems that they'll face ahead of the race that could give answers to a lot of questions in terms of the pecking order? Now, it's safe to say that Mexico is a race that never disappoints, and overtaking here, as well as the highly anticipated race starts that often see the second row drivers be P1 after turn 1 due to the long slipstream they're gaining from the cars ahead, are one of the main factors that we'll see be exploited to their absolute limit. However, what's worth mentioning is that after a heavy braking zone at this long straight, an asphalt runoff is present, which means the drivers won't be afraid to send it a bit harsher because they won't bank in their car in the gravel traps. What many are finding controversial is that while drivers are exiting the circuit, they're not always gaining an advantage of it. Quite the contrary, sometimes they lose time because of the fact that they have to safely rejoin the track, and that costs them time. Still, this counts as track limit violations that the drivers will most definitely suffer from quite a lot in Mexico. Another issue here is the consistency of the FIA. The governing body has found itself in a very difficult position after the Austin GP because of how they've handled similar situations with different outcomes. So, many are expecting that the inconsistency needs to change. And if we do have a new steward, then it might as well be a different scenario. And again, the weather here is going to be a very big issue because the hot temperatures are not going to be present as they were back in Austin. With cloudy conditions and temperatures up to 20 degrees, the drivers will have a lot of problems in terms of getting their tyres to the optimal working temperatures and further exploiting the maximum potential out of the car. To add the sea level of the Mexico GP, which is one of the highest on the track, as the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez stands at 2,250 meters above sea level, and the oxygen here is rarefied, so cooling down the car is also going to be a big issue, as we seen last year. Therefore, to expect that the same pecking order from Austin will be replicated is definitely a far-fetched scenario, mostly because the drivers, although having a lot more time to test out the new upgrades that they prepared in Austin and are going to bring some new bits in Mexico, will see this challenge being hindered by the weather conditions and the track temperatures as well. The high altitude of the track is not posing a threat to the car's cooling only. The tyres might suffer as well. With a long straight and many braking points, this is a circuit that is considered to be a low degradation one, and that's a strategy that teams will approach it with. However, the rarefied air could make it very difficult on the drivers to cool down their tyres, which could further force them to opt for the alternative two-stopper of a strategy. And the team that has absolutely dominated the Austin GP, Ferrari, is now not very certain that they could replicate the same success in Mexico. As Fred Vasseur went on to say, "We come to Mexico on a high after the 1-2 in Austin, which was a great motivational boost for the entire team. The Hermanos Rodriguez circuit presents a completely different challenge. The fact that Mexico City sits at 2,200 meters above sea level requires a completely unique approach when it comes to setting up the car. The rarefied air also places additional stress on components of the car that need to disperse heat, meaning the systems, brakes, power unit, and of course the tyres too. Finding the right balance to deal with this while getting the maximum performance out of the car is not an easy task, but we prepared well for it back in the factory." Now, Fred Vasseur has also opened up about the upgrades that his team has seemingly divided to 2 weekends, the first one being in Austin, while the second one being in Mexico, as the Frenchman is now hopeful that there'll be more gains from this race than he originally downplayed it. Talking about it to a greater extent, Vasseur said, "When you speak about upgrades, it's what we're declaring, that it is only aero. But performance is not only in the external shape of the car. We're at the point in development now that when you're bringing something, we're speaking about tenths of a second in pace, and you have much more to do with the setup. It's true, when the team is bringing something, perhaps sometimes it's a step forward in terms of performance, but it's also creating a bit of a mess in the setup. It's not always a step forward, but it's not that because we're not declaring something, that we're not bringing something. We have to declare the upgrades on the external shape, but it's not that because we're not declaring something." McLaren are also going to bring their own package of upgrades now that Norris has lost 5 points to the championship to Verstappen, and it seems like the long-awaited floor might debut here in Mexico. Even though the team was not sure that it would produce the gains projected in the wind tunnel, as they would meet the hurdle that every other team met, they've nothing to lose now, as they're looking to secure the championship in the constructors category, as well as help Norris in the last 5 races and 2 sprint events to catch up to Verstappen, even though he's closer to losing the second place to Leclerc than to gain on the Dutchman for P1. Andrea Stella was quite confident about the upcoming race in Mexico, and when talking about it, he said, "I think the next circuit in Mexico should be a little more suitable to the characteristics of our car. We also have to keep developing the car. Like here, we took some developments at the front of the car, but they were nothing too large in terms of potential lap time impact. We have a couple of more things that are coming in the next 2 races. We'll see if we're in a condition to alter the competitiveness of the car." Now, there are teams that are still to test out their upgrades in Mexico, and the conditions that Vasseur has talked about are definitely not going to help them in a great manner. Mercedes is adamant that the Austin upgrades, while controversial to say the least, are the ones that will be present on both of the W15. This is a situation that Toto Wolff has spoken about, as he went on to say, "I don't think we have a fundamental issue with the upgrade very much. My thinking it's more interaction on aero and on mechanical stuff. Therefore, we're going to continue with the upgrade. It makes no sense to not, because there's a lot of lap time you leave on the table. However, on the other side, you need to be very open-minded. George drove the July upgrade in the race because we didn't have the new floor, and that seemed pretty competitive." A massive change has been implemented in the weekend format as well, because the second free practice will last 30 minutes more, which will offer the drivers a lot more time to test out the tyres and to see where the limits of their machines are. This schedule, however, has been implemented with a proper reason, to assist Pirelli with the tyre development for the 2025 campaign with the softer compounds in its range, which includes a new C6 tyre. This is the tyre that Pirelli is considering implementing from 2025 onwards, and quite obviously this is a blessing in disguise that the drivers can very well use in their own favour if they were to utilise the performance to their car to the absolute maximum. But the test itself is going to be very tricky, because each driver will have 2 additional sets of tyres available for the session, with the one set being identical to the one being used for the weekend, and the other one will be the 2025's prototype. Both tyres will not have any identifying sidewall colours, as Pirelli will be the only side here to know which tyres have been allocated to the car. When talking about this, the official suppliers of tyres to F1 said, "The plan is for the program to include a performance run and a long run for each set, with every team running the same number of laps with the same quantity of fuel on board, dependent on the tyre of the run. The only exception will be in the case of a regular race driver being replaced for FP1 by a young driver. These race drivers will carry out the Pirelli test for 60 minutes of FP2 only, and will have an additional set of medium compound tyres to catch up as much as possible on acquiring data for the rest of the weekend." So, with all this in mind, what challenge do you think would be the biggest one to tackle from F1 teams in Mexico? And more importantly, do you think that McLaren and Ferrari have what it takes to further pressurise Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship? Let us know in the comments down below.